You've had a remarkable career. You've worked for every president from Eisenhower through Reagan. As you look back over your career, just talk, if you would, for a few minutes about the range of things you've done.
They do range from atomic energy issues, particularly the test ban treaty, which was a red-hot, major national defense issue in those days, up through the anti-poverty program. I chaired the White House Task Force on Education for President Johnson. I directed the rebuilding of Alaska after their earthquake some years ago. I helped the president and Weaver organize the Department of Housing and Urban Development, served as Assistant Secretary. And I served Nixon as the director of the Office of Executive Management, which was his management arm as he undertook. He tried to develop the most comprehensive reorganization of the government that's ever been proposed by any president. But and he was succeeding until the '72 election and Watergate brought that to a halt. Then I had a number of assignments under President Reagan, and finally headed up Luther Gulick's old institution, the Institute of Public Administration, which, by the way, was the birthplace of public administration.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And Luther Gulick was really, the concept went back further, but insofar as organized public administration, that was where it was born, and that was the first institution to grant degree in public administration. That degree granting was later transferred to Syracuse University, which became then the Maxwell School, which is premier school today in public administration. But it all started through Luther Gulick at what was then called Bureau of Municipal Research. When I headed it, it was Institute of Public Administration. And my work there was largely, we were the first ones in Eastern and Central Europe to help those governments make the transition from communism to democratic institutions and a market economy.
Truly public administration with an international focus.
Oh, yes, yes. And I did have the opportunity to head our foreign assistance in the Western Hemisphere for President Reagan.
Let's talk, if we can, about the Alaska earthquake. I know that was a key moment in your career. What exactly did President Johnson ask you to do?
Rebuild Alaska after the earthquake. But listening to Thad today, had I had to work through the kind of organization that exists today, I would have failed totally. The president, moved very, very quickly. Within 5 days after the earthquake, he had reconstituted the cabinet as the Alaskan Planning and Reconstruction Commission, headed by a senator, which is totally unprecedented in our history. But because the senator cannot issue directives to the executive branch, the president appointed me as the director. So I reported to the president and to Senator Anderson, which gave me a tremendous strength, and I was able to make kind of decisions that no one can make today, short of the president.
That was an extraordinary moment in history. Can you give the viewers of this tape a little bit of a run-up to what actually happened and how you then took on this role?
Yeah. Well, what happened is it was the most severe earthquake ever recorded in this hemisphere, 9.2 Richter scale, but it lasted for 4 minutes, which is very unusual. And well over 50,000 square miles of land either rose or sunk permanently a minimum of 5 feet. Well, that meant, for example, that the Alaskan economy based upon fishing was just totally knocked out because all the small boat harbors were either too shallow now for the fishing boats to come in, or they were too deep and the breakwaters would not protect those small boats against the ocean waves, and the canneries were all knocked out. Most of the boats were smashed, so the economy was a dead standstill. Of course, water and sewer systems were broken up, and And unlike a hurricane, you can't just go in and rebuild. You have to determine first where it's safe to rebuild, requiring a lot of advanced soil testing. We had barge testing equipment from the lower 48 up to Alaska, which took a lot of time. And when I got to Alaska after the earthquake, we could not find a single engineer who felt this could be done. Enough reconstruction of relocating, redesigning, and constructing water and sewer systems, for example, for people would have to abandon Alaska before the cold weather and go to the lower 48. So the president said this is a case of saving a state, and it has to be done. So even though people said it was impossible, that was not an option.
So
it had to be done.
So do you remember when you first learned or were pulled into this activity? Can you share with us what that was like and how you learned that you would be heading up this effort?
Yeah, I was assistant general manager of the Atomic Energy Commission. That was the third-ranking operational officer in the AEC. And Senator Anderson chaired our Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. He came to our office, and the chairman of the AEC asked me to sit in. I assumed it was some congressional problem to deal with. And what happened is that Senator Anderson began by talking about how complicated this rebuilding was going to be and how the president had taken this unprecedented action to reconstitute the cabinet and so forth, and that there had to be an executive director to direct the rebuilding. And Senator Anderson, had recommended me to the president, who the president didn't even meet with me, and of course he approved it. I also, it turned out, had support from the Bureau of the Budget. And I was stunned because I had no idea how to do it. I'd never dealt with a disaster before, never been to Alaska. And I was really stunned by this. And then we had a meeting of the commission, I guess 2 days later, and from there on it was just one breathless pace, making one decision after another. But you know, the way we approached it was absolutely the opposite of how these are approached today and how Katrina is being approached. Instead of having a big, complicated Department of Homeland Security, we went the opposite direction, and that was to rely upon existing organization structure, and instead of building superstructures, simplify existing systems and structures. And we relied upon the authority of the involved agencies and departments. And since I reported to the president, to the cabinet, and to Senator Anderson, I could draw upon any department. I call up the Secretary of Defense, and he was a part of this is another thing, he was a part of the process. It wasn't another agency calling upon Defense Department or HHFA, but it was the director of our group, of which I, as Secretary of Defense, am a part. Consequently, we were able to had all kinds of leverage they don't have today.
Talk, if you would, a little bit about the notion of reconstituting the federal cabinet. That's a huge deal, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Initially, there was not all the cabinet was involved. They were by the. It turned out that every department and almost every independent agency was involved. It was until Katrina, it was the most complicated, most complex rebuilding we've ever had in peacetime. So the President Johnson decided to go this route, and none of us would have recommended this. Certainly not recommended having a senator chair the cabinet in that having been reconstituted in this Alaska Rebuilding Commission. So it has never been done before or since. But I have suggested and urged that we be in a position in this country not necessarily to replicate that structure, but in times of a major, major emergency, whether it be attacked by the terrorist or natural disaster, that we look outside the box, as President Johnson did, and set up some kind of special mechanism. You cannot, in my judgment, put in place a permanent organization that is broad enough to handle a major, major crisis of this sort. What happens is that you either try to reach out and get everyone together, such as Department of Homeland Security, but you don't succeed because everything is involved. All the economics, all the physical resources, almost every field of human endeavor gets involved in this kind of a crisis. Well, you can't draw everybody together in one department. So what you have to do is have developed the kind of presidential leverage that can utilize and draw upon and energize the whole government and make the whole government and every department feel they are a part of it, not something they're doing to cooperate and help out somebody else, but they are part of it.